This is where we actually live in the Philippines. And honestly, it's probably not what most people expect because this isn't a condo. It's not a resort.
And the way everything works here is very different.
We live on our property here shared with family members with about 6 or 7 different houses, all on one property. Here in the Philippines, they call that a compound. But once you start living here, you realize there's a lot more going on behind the scenes, especially when it comes to things like water and electricity. And one of the first things that really stood out to me living here is how the water system actually works. It all starts out here at the street where the water is metered. But instead of being fully underground like you'd expect back in the States, a lot of it is run through hoses above the ground. Our water coming in is then fed into a storage tank, and from there is pumped into our house. So if the pressure drops or the supply changes, you're relying on solely what's stored in the tank. And that's something you don't really think about until you're actually living with it. And once you do, you start to realize a lot of things here are set up in a similar way. And once you see how the water works, you start to notice the same thing with the electricity. It starts out on the main lines along the street, runs into the compound to the meter, and then from there, you'll actually see the wiring running to the trees and across the whole property before it finally connects into the house. And because power isn't always guaranteed, setups like this often include things like backup generators or solar lighting, which we have. So you start to realize really quickly, everything here is a little more hands-on. But once you understand how things work behind the scenes, daily life here starts to feel very different. A lot of life happens outside. Things like cooking are often done in what's called a dirty kitchen. Laundry is still done by hand in many cases and hung out to dry right in the open. It's a slower pace and a much more hands-on way of living. And because this is all happening in a shared space, you're never really living completely on your own.
And this is just part of our daily life here.
And because this is a shared compound, there's always something happening around you. You've got people outside, animals running around, even small stores right on the property. It's not quiet, and it's definitely not private, but that's just part of the lifestyle living here. And that's why where you're located inside the compound actually makes a big difference. Our place sits towards the back of the compound, and one thing that makes it a little different is having a fenced-in area, which gives you a little bit more space compared to some of the other houses on the property. And another big advantage of being at the end of the property is we actually get a really great view behind us. But even with all of this kind of setup isn't for everybody. You are living close to other family members. Things aren't always as clean or as organized as you might be used to, and systems like water and electricity aren't always as consistent. So there definitely are trade-offs. And for some people, that's enough to make them want to leave. For me personally, it definitely took some time to adjust, but once you do, it starts to feel more normal. And then there's the environment itself. You've got fruit trees all around the property, papayas growing right outside, coconut trees, avocados, pomelos, jackfruit trees, and it's just one of those things that doesn't seem like a big deal at first until you're actually living with it every day. You're not having to run out to the store for everything. Sometimes it's just right outside. And one thing I didn't fully think about before living here was just adjusting to the environment itself. Because living in a place like this, especially outside the city, you are a lot closer to nature. That also means dealing with things like bugs, spiders, large insects, even cockroaches that are bigger than what you might be used to. And it's not constant, but it's something you do notice, especially in the beginning. So you learn pretty quickly to be a little more aware, especially walking around outside, because you're not in a fully developed area. You're surrounded by trees, plants, and open land. It's just part of being closer to nature. And like everything else, it's something you just have to adjust to over time. And it's not just the environment. Your day-to-day habits start to change too. Like with electricity, brownouts do happen here, so you have to start thinking ahead a little more. A lot of people have some kind of backup plan, whether it's a generator, solar lights, or even just a power station to keep things up and running. Same thing with internet. If you're working online, it's pretty common to have a backup connection just in case one goes out. You just learn to have a plan for things that you never really had to think about before. And after a while, it just becomes part of your routine. And this is where it all comes together. What it actually feels like just walking through here day to day.
So with all that, this is our life in the Philippines. And we're curious, would you live in a place like this? Let us know in the comments. And thanks for watching.
Dum dum dum.